Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through research and sources to pull out the actionable insights you can use. Today, we're diving into the really incredible world of masters athletics. We've got a great article here looking deep into the physiology and performance of older athletes. And our mission really is to equip you, the track and field coach, with the essential knowledge from this source to help you better understand, train effectively, and really support your masters and adult athletes. Many of these athletes train with just as much enthusiasm, sometimes even more intensity than younger competitors. Their successes, often phenomenal, but what's actually going on inside their bodies as they age? And crucially, what does that mean for how you coach them day to day?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating area because, look, performance inevitably declines somewhat,
Duh.
after the fourth or fifth decade. That's biology. But the human body's adaptability, it's truly remarkable even later in life.
Hmm.
We're going to unpack those specific physiological shifts, sure. But I think more importantly, we'll look at how targeted training can significantly mitigate some of these changes. It really allows us to redefine what's possible for older athletes. So for you, the coach, the core question becomes, how do we leverage these insights? How do we keep athletes performing at their best for longer, pushing their own unique boundaries?
Exactly. That's the challenge, and it's an exciting one, isn't it? Okay, so let's start with the basics, the fundamental physiological stuff. When you look at physical stature, body composition,
Hmm.
what are the key changes coaches absolutely need to be aware of with their masters athletes?
Right. Well, generally, you'll see some height reduction. This usually starts kicking in around 35 to 40 years old. It's mostly down to the intervertebral discs and the spine compressing a bit. Sometimes posture contributes too. And then later on, maybe after 40, 50 for women, 50, 60 for men, you might see some decrease in bone mineral density, which can also chip away at height.
Okay, so a bit shorter. What about weight? Is the middle age spread inevitable?
Well, there's definitely a common trend towards weight gain, typically between 25 and 45. And yeah, that's largely linked to an increase in body fat. That process often starts subtly around age 20. It's influenced by the usual suspects, diet, maybe less activity than when younger, and also a slightly reduced ability to mobilize fat stores.
Right, but that's the general population.
Mhm.
What about our athletes, the ones who are training consistently, sometimes quite hard? Do they follow the same pattern?
And this is such a crucial point for you coaches. Physically active, older people, and especially competitive masters athletes, they consistently have significantly lower body fat than their sedentary peers.
Uh,
Now, regular training might not completely stop any age-related fat gain, but it dramatically reduces that worrying shift of fat from, the limbs to the center of the body, centralized adiposity.
well,
And that type of fat accumulation is strongly linked to cardiovascular and metabolic diseases.
mm-hmm.
So keeping your masters athletes active isn't just about performance. It directly cuts down these major health risks. Their training is like doubly valuable.
That's huge, a massive incentive beyond just times or distances. Okay, let's pivot to muscle. Strength and neuromuscular function. What's the typical timeline there? When does decline start to become noticeable?
Peak maximal muscle strength. You're generally looking at somewhere between 25 and 35 years old. After that, it tends to begin a slow, gradual decline. Sarcopenia, that's the term for age-related loss of muscle mass and strength that tends to accelerate around age 40. Interestingly, it often seems a bit more pronounced in men compared to women.
Okay, accelerates around 40. And what's happening at the muscle fiber level? Are the types changing?
The fiber types themselves, fast twitch, slow twitch, seem to stay pretty consistent, actually. But what does change is both the total number of muscle fibers and the size of the individual fibers. They tend to decrease. Some research points to roughly a 10% loss of total fibers per decade after age 50.
Wow, 10% per decade. That adds up. And the nervous system controlling those muscles, does that slow down too?
It does. The nervous system's ability to process information quickly and effectively activate the muscles, that slows down a bit with age. This contributes to movements, both simple and complex, becoming generally slower. You might see things like lower firing rates from motor units, the nerve signals aren't quite as frequent, and maybe longer twitch durations, so the muscle contraction itself is a tad slower.
Okay, so things are slowing down,
Yeah.
but can they still fully activate the muscle they do have?
Yes, and this is a really key takeaway for coaches. Older individuals generally retain the ability to maximally recruit their skeletal muscle. they can still switch it all on, so to speak,
Yeah.
which strongly suggests that the strength reduction we see, it's more about those local muscle factors like the number and size of the fibers we just talked about, rather than a fundamental breakdown in the nervous system's ability to initiate contraction.
Got it. So it's not like the signal isn't getting through. It's more about what the signal finds when it gets there. That means strength training is still very much on the table.
Absolutely. Highly effective.
Okay, let's move to the engine room, cardiovascular and lung function. What are the big shifts coaches need to know about there?
Probably the most notable, most consistent change is the decrease in maximal heart rate, HR max. It drops by roughly 1 beat per minute per year as we age. It's pretty linear. And for you coaches, relying on that old 220 minus age formula, it's just not that accurate. The better formula, the one research supports for pretty much everyone, regardless of sex or training level, is HR max equals 208 minus 0.7 times age.
Okay, 208 minus 0.7 times age, that's crucial for setting training zones accurately. Super important.
That goal, yeah.
And what about the lungs themselves, capacity, efficiency?
Lung function sees some definite changes too. Vital capacity, the max amount of air you can breathe out after breathing in fully, and also FEV 1.0, which is how quickly you can force air out in 1 second. Both of those decrease pretty linearly, starting from around age 20 or 30. On the flip side, residual volume, the air left in your lungs after you exhale completely, that actually increases. So the ratio of trapped air to total lung capacity goes up, essentially means a bit less fresh air for oxygen exchange with each breath. And VE max, the maximal amount of air you can move in and out per minute, that also decreases after physical maturity.
Okay, so we're seeing these fundamental shifts. Body composition, muscle, heart, lungs. It's really clear that coaching masters athletes isn't just about, slightly modifying a youth program. It sounds like the approach needs to be really strategic, really nuanced.
Totally. But here's the compelling part, right? While these changes are real, they are inevitable. Consistent, smart exercise significantly lessens their impact on actual performance. Even with some muscle loss, active older athletes tend to keep good structural and biochemical quality in their remaining muscle. The really profound good news for you, the coach, is that the body's adaptability, even at older ages, is just incredibly resilient.
And this is where resistance training really steps into the spotlight for masters athletes, isn't it? It seems critical.
Oh, absolutely critical. Unlike endurance training on its own, strength training actively reduces muscle atrophy in older adults. And even more impressively, it can actually cause older individuals to increase their muscle cross-sectional area. They can build new muscle. The research is pretty clear. Getting older doesn't stop you from getting stronger or building muscle. Study after study shows these remarkable strength gains, often well over 100% improvement in specific lifts, sometimes in just like 12 weeks of consistent work. There was one study, men aged 60-72, they showed a 107% increase in leg extension strength and a massive 227% increase in leg flexion strength after just 12 weeks, training at 80% of their 1-rep max.
Wow, those numbers are seriously compelling. That's the kind of data coaches can use to really motivate their athletes, show them what's possible. Beyond just getting stronger on lifts, what are the wider benefits of making sure resistance training is a priority?
The benefits spill over into everything, really. Resistance-trained older athletes, they're generally leaner, they carry more muscle mass, and they're often 30 to 50% stronger than sedentary folks their age. They also tend to have higher bone mineral densities, huge for injury prevention, and just generally more strength and power than people who only do aerobic exercise.
Yeah.
And importantly, this isn't just for elite athletes. Even for previously sedentary older individuals, starting resistance training dramatically improves their ability to do everyday things, activities of daily living. And crucially, it helps prevent falls. These are profound, life-enhancing benefits you can absolutely communicate to your athletes.
Definitely. Okay, switching back to cardio and lungs for a second. How do things like HR max and VO2 max respond to training in older adults? Can training actually stop them from declining?
Well, that age-related drop in HR max seems to happen pretty similarly whether someone is sedentary or highly trained. So training is incredibly beneficial, but it doesn't seem to prevent that specific decrease in maximum heart rate. And the lower VO2 max values the maximal oxygen uptake that we see in older athletes. That's primarily a result of reduced maximal cardiac output, which itself is largely driven by that lower HR max.
Okay, so the heart rate ceiling coming down is a major factor, limiting how much blood the heart can push out. Does the body compensate anywhere else, like in the muscles?
Yes, it often does. While the actual blood flow going to the limbs might decrease slightly with age, studies show this is often compensated for by a greater arterial mixed venous oxygen difference. What that means is the muscles get better at extracting the oxygen from the blood that does arrive. they become more efficient.
Huh.
Which is a critical point for coaches, right? Adaptations aren't just central from the heart. There are peripheral adaptations happening in the muscle, too. And this also brings up that really important question. How much the performance decline is aging itself versus just, deconditioning or maybe training less intensely?
Yeah.
The research suggests it's both, but inactivity or dialing back the intensity might actually play a bigger role than aging alone in many cases.
Some massive insight. So maintaining appropriate intensity, even if volume changes, that sounds absolutely key for coaches.
Exactly. There was that fascinating 25-year follow-up study on elite distance runners, the ones who kept their relative training intensity high. They saw significantly less drop in VO2 max, only about 0.3% per year, mostly linked to slight weight gain compared to sedentary folks, or even those doing general fitness training. And here's something really interesting for coaches. When older subjects train at relatively high intensities, they absolutely can still significantly increase both their endurance capacity and their strength. But the way they improve aerobically might be different. While younger athletes often boost VO2 max by increasing cardiac output, older athletes tend to show much greater gains in muscle oxidative enzyme activity.
So the muscle cells themselves get better at using oxygen.
Precisely. It suggests that these peripheral factors within the muscle play a more significant role in aerobic gains for older athletes. That's a really crucial nuance when you're designing training. Maybe means emphasizing things like muscular endurance work, lactate threshold sessions that directly target those muscle level adaptations.
That's a fantastic point, a really unique lens for coaching strategies. What about lactate threshold, LT? How does age affect that marker?
Right, LT, often looked at as a percentage of VO2 max, is arguably the best single predictor of endurance running performance. It shows the intensity you can hold. Now, interestingly, if you look at LT as a percentage of VO2 max, it actually tends to increase with age. But that's mostly because the VO2 max itself, the denominator, is lower in older groups. If you compare LT at an absolute oxygen uptake value, the actual amount of oxygen being used, it does decline with age. So while older athletes get better at working at a higher percentage of their shrinking maximum capacity, their overall absolute work rate at threshold still goes down.
Got it. So more efficient with what they have, but the overall capacity is lower. Okay, so it really sounds like while some changes are just part of aging, the body's ability to adapt, especially to that targeted strength work and high-intensity aerobic training, is pretty incredible for masters athletes. And that insight about peripheral factors being key for aerobic gains in older athletes, that feels like a real game changer for coaching.
Absolutely. And if you connect this to the bigger picture for you coaches, it just hammers home that tailoring programs specifically for these physiological shifts and really focusing on maintaining appropriate intensity, even if volume or frequency needs adjusting that, can yield massive returns, not just in race times or distances, but in genuinely mitigating the broader effects of aging. So the next logical question is, how do these general physiological principles translate into coaching-specific events, especially given the unique demands of track and field?
Great transition. Let's get practical, starting with something every coach worries about. Injury risk. What do we need to keep front of mind for masters athletes?
Yeah, injury risk is definitely higher, generally speaking, particularly for injuries involving tendons, cartilage, and bone. We're talking things like rotator cuff issues, Achilles tendon ruptures are more common, stress fractures. And critically for you managing them, healing time is often much longer. Complete recovery from some of these can take up to a full year. Patience and really careful progression are essential.
A full year. Okay, that requires serious management. Is there any upside, any reassurance?
Yes, definitely. It's reassuring that the risk of sudden death during exercise isn't actually any higher for older athletes compared to younger ones.
Mm?
And of course, sticking with an active lifestyle significantly lowers the overall risk of death from many chronic diseases. So the net benefit is overwhelmingly positive.
Good to keep that perspective. Okay, let's break down some event groups. Sprinting. Events like the 100, 200 meters. What are the key declines? And more importantly, what can coaches do?
Right, for sprinters, if you look at world records, you see a pretty steady decline. Like for the men's 100 meters, it's roughly 1% per year slower between ages 25 and 60. Then it tends to accelerate a bit, closer to 2% per year after 60. And the main physiological reasons behind that slowdown boil down to three things. One, reduce maximum strength in the leg muscles. Two, a slower rate of force development. They just can't apply force to the ground as quickly. And three, less elastic energy storage and return from their tendons, less spring.
Okay, and how does that show up in their technique?
Typically, master sprinters manage to preserve their stride frequency, their turnover, pretty well. but their stride length tends to decrease. And that's mainly because of those reduced propulsive forces pushing off the ground.
Right. This is where it gets really practical for coaches, isn't it? Knowing exactly what levers to pull in training to try and slow that decline. What does the source suggest?
Okay, for master sprinters, the source highlights three really crucial training pillars. First, hypertrophy resistance training, especially in the off-season and preseason. You have to maintain that muscle mass and strength foundation. It's non-negotiable. Second, power training. This needs to be a consistent focus. We're talking plyometrics bounds, hops, jumps, and also specific gym work like jump squats. Things that directly target rate of force development and using that elastic energy. And third, consistent flexibility training, particularly focusing on the hip and ankle joints. Maintaining mobility there becomes increasingly vital for good mechanics.
Muscle size, explosive power, and flexibility.
Got it. That's a clear roadmap for sprint coaches working with older athletes. What about hurdles? That demands so much rhythm, timing, flexibility.
Yeah.
Seems like age would hit that hard.
Hurdles are definitely tough. Aging impacts rhythm and especially flexibility, both critical for hurdling. And you see it in the times, a really steep decline starting around age 40. I saw some data from 98. The 40-year-old men's hurdle record was like 14.24 seconds. By age 60, it was almost double, 25.5 seconds.
Well, nearly doubled.
Yeah. But importantly, Masters Athletics recognizes this. They brought in rule modifications to help people keep competing safely and effectively. For men, the hurdle heights actually decrease with age, from 39 inches at 40 down to 30 inches at age 70. And the race distance is shortened too. The standard 110-meter hurdles becomes 100 meters at age 50 and then 80 meters at age 70. That's absolutely vital info for you coaches, managing expectations, planning races, keeping athletes competitive, and reducing injury risk.
That's brilliant that the sport itself adapts like that. Okay, endurance events. We sometimes hear amazing stories there. You think of Eamon Coughlin running that sub-4 mile at 41. Or even more mind-blowing, a 65-year-old running under 5 minutes for the mile. For elite distance runners, the general decline rate seems to average around 1.0% per year between about 27 and 47. And that rate seems pretty consistent regardless of the actual race distance. So yes, there's decline, but the potential for really high-level sustained performance is clearly there.
Incredible stories. And the jumping events, high jump, long jump, pole vault relying so much on power and technique.
Yeah, for those power and explosion events like jumping and throwing, you see a pretty consistent decline after a certain point. For high jump and long jump, the decline seems relatively steady right into the 80s. There isn't usually a sudden, sharp drop-off after 65 or 70. Elite high jump marks might drop about 6 inches every 5 years. Long jump maybe 2 feet every 5 years. Ballpark figures. Pole vault is interesting because it demands that mix of flexibility, speed, upper body strength, coordination. It also shows a pretty constant decline, roughly a foot every 5 years between 45 and 65. The key for coaches, again, is understanding it's driven by that underlying decline in power and force development.
Right. And finally, throwing events, shot put. Discuss.
Similar pattern, really. For explosive events like shot and disc, you often see a plateau at the elite level, maybe from 35 up to 45 years old, where performance holds fairly steady. But after 45, a steeper decline usually kicks in. Shot put might drop around a foot per year. Discuss maybe 4 feet per year after that age 45 mark. Again, for coaches, the focus has got to be on maintaining and developing that raw power and refining technique for as long as possible. So if we pull all this event-specific stuff together for you, the coach, understanding these declines and knowing the likely physiological reasons behind them, whether it's strength, power, flexibility that allows for incredibly precise, really effective training interventions, it's all about smart program design.
Absolutely. This whole deep dive really hammers home that for Masters athletes, it's less about defying age and more about intelligently adapting to it. We've covered the physiological effects, the amazing capacity for adaptation with smart training, especially that strength work and keeping intensity up, and those crucial event-specific points. Thinking about your own coaching, maybe looking through this lens. What stands out to you as the biggest takeaway or maybe game changer from our discussion today?
Ultimately, I think this material just powerfully reinforces that the desire for excellence, the pure joy of competing, they really don't have an expiry date. The real challenge for us as coaches, maybe the thought to really mull over, isn't just how we slow down the inevitable declines. It's how we continue to foster the passion and maximize the performance within the unique, evolving capabilities of each individual Masters athlete. How do we keep helping them push the boundaries of what's possible at every single age?